Hello there, welcome to Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast. I'm your host, Shelley F. Knight. I'm a former nurse and clinical hypnotherapist, turned podcaster and author of Positive Changes, a self-kick book, and Good Grieve, the A to Z approach of modern day grief healing. In each episode, I aim to share my clinical, spiritual and personal experience to help you feel inspired to create your own positive changes in life. Fear not, it's not just me. Each week I will bring on a new guest and they will share their authentic story of positive change and the tools that they used on their journey. So if you're ready to be inspired, let's go. Today I am absolutely honoured to introduce you to John Offord from the BBC. This episode may trigger you as we talk about cancer, mental health, bipolar, death and grief. I share my experience around grief, which I talk about in my next book, Good Grieve. Grief is like our fingerprint, it's unique to every single one of us, and John's story is definitely unique. It is highly emotional as he experienced so much death in such a short space of time.
It's so, sometimes you feel so powerless, as in, I feel so sad for my mum that she lost her husband of 40 years and my firstborn. Can't imagine what that is like. But then I also think we're not special, other people, we've all got stories to tell.
So if you're ready, grab a chair, grab a tissue and let's go and meet the wonderful John Offord. Today on the show, I'm joined by John Offord, and he's a broadcast journalist, a producer, a director, a broadcaster, a media trainer, and a podcast host of Different Minds. So hello there, John.
Hi there, nice to be here.
Bless you, that is quite a bio, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah, quite a lot of titles attached to me there. Yeah, but I've definitely been, I answer to all sorts these days, Shelley, to be honest.
Oh, bless you. We'll keep it clean.
Yeah.
Now, we're having quite a laugh, but bless you. You have the most amazing story to share around what happened in your life in 2013. So please do share with us, John.
Yeah, sure. So as you say, in 2013, I lost my brother and my father within a few days of each other. And yeah, that's obviously that's quite a while back now. That's 8 years ago, and yeah, that was obviously a very traumatic time in my life. And yeah, kind of looking back, I think, how on earth did I get through that? And it's obviously, as many of your listeners that will know that have experienced grief, it's a very difficult time. And yeah, I guess to start at the beginning, my brother suffered with, he had mental health issues throughout his life. And growing up with an older brother that had those challenges was difficult for all of us. And yeah, he managed to kind of get his own place and do some experience independent living, which was great for all of us. And my father one day was diagnosed with terminal bowel cancer. Yeah, just randomly, February in 2013. I remember picking my father up from the Hallamshire Hospital in Sheffield with my mum. And, I said, how did the consultation go? And my father just said, they basically said, I've got 4 to 6 weeks left to live. And I remember so vividly driving home in the car with my father in the passenger seat and my mum in the back, and just the silence. I think I will remember forever, because what do you say? And yeah, I think the radio was on, traffic was happening outside, the usual day-to-day of life, and it was just sinking in as I was driving back to drop my father off at his house, and it just seemed so surreal. And yeah, we all just, it was such a silent journey. I'll remember that forever, essentially. Yeah, and then to cut a long story short, my mother looked after my father. He basically had a bed in the living room, and if anyone knows anything about bowel cancer, obviously it's very ugly, and as you know, cancers. I didn't know anything about cancer, Shelley. To be honest, I was quite ignorant to it. It's something that I just happened to my friends and family. I didn't know anything about it. But obviously, it affects a lot of us. I'm sure our listeners have experienced it as well, unfortunately. And yeah, I guess my father was, began his palliative care. My mum was so good to him, looking after him, and as he he was on obviously medication and drugs to kind of help with the pain. And then me and my mum had a discussion about how do we break this news to my brother, because my brother, we were very protective over, I was very protective over my brother, and obviously my mum was protective over her son, and we knew he had his mental health issues. He had bipolar disorder, and we had to be very careful about how we sat my brother Anthony down to say that, look, my dad is going to die, essentially. Um, so yeah, we had that conversation with my brother. Yeah, I think we took a few days, me and my mum, to kind of think it through before we told Anthony. Yeah, and obviously, Anthony was in shock, as we all were. And then one day, Anthony, I think, as his way of coping with that was almost being reckless, and he went out drinking with friends. And he basically collapsed at a friend's house after drinking, and his friend called the ambulance, and the ambulance took over 20 minutes to get to the scene. And so I remember, which is really hard to kind of, I often try and blank this bit out, but I remember being at home at my house and my mum knocking on the door really randomly one Saturday morning, and just crying. Yeah, when I answered the door, she's just crying, and I just didn't really understand what was going on. And she mentioned, my brother, and there was a police car outside. So it was just complete chaos, and I jumped in the car with my mum, and we went to the hospital, and my brother was in intensive care, and it was just complete. It was almost like we were in a film. This nightmare, and we were literally driving backwards and forwards from the hospital where my brother was in intensive care to my father at my mum's house, high on drugs. It was almost like, which one's going to die first? And you were driving backwards and forwards between the two, and it was just so surreal. And yeah, the doctors then said that we're going to have to, unfortunately, my brother had suffered a lack of oxygen to the brain when he collapsed, essentially. And they said there was nothing that they could do, and the best thing to do would be to turn off the life support machine. Yeah, so and that was just horrific. And me and my mom to hear that and from a doctor, and so there with all our friends and family, we all had to say our goodbyes. And yeah, it was, you can't find the words to describe that, really. When he was in a coma, really, so he never gained consciousness. There was one time when I held his hand for the last time, and he did twitch his hand a little bit towards the end. But he's just so sad because I think people, often in society, we're so quick to judge, and people say, well, if he hadn't been drinking alcohol, if he hadn't been so reckless. But actually, if I had a mental health condition, I'm sure I would have done the same. I think I've learned not to judge, from this experience. And so then they turned off a life support machine, and then the miracle, which is just, I just find this absolutely incredible, a testament to the human spirit, is that my father stayed alive against all the doctors what they were saying, and he basically my father stayed around until my brother's funeral on the 8th of May, almost to make sure that my brother had a proper sending off, and my dad passed away on the evening of my brother's funeral. So that was almost 3 months after, extra that he stayed around to be there for me and my mum. Yeah, so it feels quite raw speaking about it now, because it's, even though it's 8 years ago, it's not often, I guess, that you talk about it in so much detail. It's, I think the thing with death is, it's so, sometimes you feel so powerless, as in, I feel so sad for my mum that she lost her husband of 40 years and her firstborn. Can't imagine what that is like. But then I also think we're not special, other people, we've all got stories to tell. And yeah, it's and I remember I was just stunned, really. I didn't react in any way. And I remember, and it's so funny, because on the day of my brother's funeral, me and my mum were about to go off to the funeral and leave my dad with some friends at my mum's house. And my dad got out of bed and said that my brother was pregnant. And me and my mum burst out laughing. And obviously, because my dad was high on drugs, he was hallucinating and saying silly things. But there was just this crazy scene where me and my mum were going out to the funeral cars in tears of laughter. And, you feel awful, because, that's not what you should be doing. But in those moments, you just end up, you have to laugh. And yeah, and I didn't. It's funny, isn't it? We all have different ways of dealing with grief. My mum would cry often, and I wouldn't cry at all. The only time that it got me was when we had a ceremony. So we buried my dad's and my brother's ashes together, and my dad wrote a letter to me and my brother, telling us to look after my mom and to lead happy lives after, obviously he knew we had terminal cancer. But what really got me is he wrote a letter to my brother, assuming that my brother would be alive, with me and my mum. So I had to go to the grave, and I had to read that letter that my dad wrote out to my brother Anthony, and obviously he was assuming that my brother was still alive. And I was surrounded by all my friends and family, and I started reading this letter out loud, and I completely lost it. Yeah, and that was the first time I just couldn't stop crying. Yeah. So, and that's kind of the only time that I've ever cried, to be honest. But I would just remember that how powerful that moment was for me. Yeah, so that that's my story, Shelley. Yeah.
Bless you. Thank you so much for sharing. I was just blown away about how many things you've been exposed to. I just really felt the energy of, like, when you were saying, like, time was really precious with your dad. You was told like 4 to 6 weeks. And yes, the time was really precious, but then you're still taking time to sort of tell Anthony the bad news.
Yeah.
Like how you must have felt like we need to tell him sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And then, bless you, there's almost moments of humor in it, like when you was driving back
Yeah.
from the hospital thinking, who's going to die first? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And your brother being pregnant on the day of his funeral, and and I just loved, if that's the right word, because I can hear it's still painful 8 years on.
Yeah.
But I just think it's so real, John. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Grief's so hard, I want to say. It's also very normal.
Yeah.
But in your case, you've had like the traumatic grief, where you've had the sudden loss of your brother, which wasn't foreseen. You've had the anticipatory grief, admittedly short, of your dad's diagnosis.
Yeah.
You've had so much grief in that. And then you've sort of, protected your mum. And I was just like, oh, you've just been through so much. And I totally get the part where you just said, I just blanked it out. Like
Yeah,
he was in the car and it was silent and you were aware that, life goes on.
yeah,
You know, it's just, I've been there in this world, like you feel that everything's just, carrying on. And you think, is this happening? Did I imagine that? Am I dreaming? And you can't
absolutely.
quite, you can't quite place it. You think they're still laughing, they're still going to work, that person's
Yeah,
still going to
yeah,
school, and you're
yeah.
there.
That was it. I was so almost angry that life was going on and things were normal, and the postman would still come in the morning, and the milkman, and people would still phone up, and I'm like, why hasn't the world stopped? Why is the world going on? I almost was angry about it to start with.
Yeah, and it's so true. We just feel like, some kind of sort of like film effect where we're standing there in
Yeah,
the middle and everything's zooming around us and we're
yeah,
just not moving. And I could really relate to that. As you said, you blanked
yeah,
it out.
yeah.
I love the
And the
part.
other, sorry, go on, Shelley. Yeah,
No, I was going to say, I love the part at the funeral. I'm not sure if anyone else can relate to this. Maybe it's just us, John. Who knows?
yeah,
But I remember being at a friend's father's funeral,
yeah,
and there was just people just absolutely sobbing, but then absolutely crying with laughter, with memories. And it's
yeah,
just so fine, that line between sort of like
yeah,
laughing and crying. And I know on a bad day now, with the hormonal female I am, I can be going, ha ha ha, and then you just go, oh, and it all just
yeah,
comes out, that release and all that stuff
yeah,
you've carried. So I
yeah.
could really get that too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing to say was, it was funny because it dawned on me afterwards when I kind of had a few months to kind of understand what had actually happened, because I was living 2013 was pretty much a blur to me. I was fortunate to get time off work at the BBC. And I was just I wasn't really doing much with my days, and I felt almost lazy. But then I also realized I was emotionally exhausted and processing what had happened. And I then dawned on me, why did it take over 20 minutes for the ambulance to get there with my brother? And I sent off a random email to the coroner, and he then got back to me straight away to apologize and say this should have gone to a coroner's inquest automatically. And I'm sorry that it's taken you to highlight this to us. And to cut a long story short, I then basically spent the 18 months kind of representing my brother and going through a coroner's inquest with Yorkshire Ambulance Service. And I represented myself in the inquest, and I got so involved in it. I've got boxes and boxes full of papers and witness statements, and I had to put my mum through that, but I felt it was important that if there was any mistakes that had happened, that's obviously not going to bring my brother back, but I don't want this to happen to anyone else. And to cut a long story short, the coroner ruled a narrative verdict, and he said that had the ambulance got there earlier, my brother probably would have survived. And obviously to hear that was horrendous. And the coroner stopped short from a negligent ruling, but he did make over £1 million of recommendations that the Yorkshire Ambulance Service had to enforce to change their procedures so that this never happens again. Because essentially, someone was on a lunch break, and of course, paramedics have to have lunch. Like, no, we all need to eat, but they hadn't had a proper procedure in place. When an ambulance goes past a site which requires medical attention, they hadn't got enough resources to deal with that situation. And there was a few miscommunications which we went through in detail in the inquest. And that it was, and to me, I felt so guilty about that, because I was dragging my mum through the court process, and we actually had to hear the 999 call recording. And this is quite horrific. So but we had to listen back to my brother struggling to breathe on that call. And I said to my mum, do you really have to stay in the court for this? I don't want to put you through this. But I was so driven. It was something to focus on, for almost to do something for my brother. And I did question while I was doing this, but I felt it was important. And also there was a paramedic, a lone responder that was sent to the flat. And she, all lone responders, they have to work together with someone else, which is what, for their own personal safety more than anything else. And she was sent to that situation without any backup. And she took the decision not to go in the flat, which is why my brother didn't get the health care that he deserved until 25 minutes after the 999 call was made. And we met that paramedic in court who gave a witness statement, and she explained that she was on the scene pretty quickly, and she took the decision not to go in the premises because she was on her own. And for a while, if I'm honest, I probably blamed her for my brother's death. And then they kept us quite separate, and in the Yorkshire Ambulance Service, they had, expensive lawyers representing their side. And my mum wanted to go to the toilet halfway through proceedings, and I went with her to the door. And then, you wouldn't believe this, but the paramedic that had just given that witness statement was just coming out the lady's toilet. And she just gave this very professional statement in court. Obviously, she would have received lots of advice from the NHS on what to say. I'm sure this is pretty protocol for lots of paramedics. She broke down in tears, and so did me and my mum, essentially, and we hugged each other. And we said, it's not your fault, essentially. And again, that was a magical moment that wasn't part of the court proceedings, that just happened. Yeah. So
Wow. I knew you was going to say she was coming out the toilet, because I think you can, at the end of the day, we're human. And we can be told to sort of tick that box, follow that policy. This is what you need to say. But at the end of the day, she must have been carrying so many emotions herself, thinking, what if I had it done, and things like that. And I'm glad you broke down.
Yeah, what an awful position for her to, she has to live with that. And I know it wasn't her fault, and she should have had the backup that was required. And it was just I just find it such a God works in mysterious ways. I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I found that to be such a special moment. Yeah, everything happens for a reason, I guess.
Yeah. When you experience the sudden death of Anthony, when we get sudden death, whether it's sort of like suicide, murder, or the case of Anthony, quite unique, there is so much questioning left behind, like what if only I had, and things like that. Do you feel that pursuing it was like a healing process for you, that you got close, you got answers? As you said, it wouldn't bring Anthony back, but do you find that it helped you in some way to get answers?
Yeah, definitely. I guess I wanted to do all I could for Anthony, and I wasn't able to help him in life. And obviously, with his bipolar, it's a condition he had to learn to live with, and that he struggled with. And that obviously affected me and my mum as well, and all the family as well, as anyone will know. Living with people, family members that have mental health conditions, it affects everyone essentially. And I guess there was a little bit of me like, I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have when he was alive. And you do. I just felt driven to try and, I wasn't to try and to turn this into a positive essentially. And I had, they haven't, Yorkshire Ambulance Service have implemented massive changes now because of this. And we got, lots of press attention. And Shelley, I became obsessed with it, and you know, I work in the media. You know, I was working for the BBC in Yorkshire at the time, and I found myself on the news, on BBC News, and this was quite a strange position for me to be in, because I'm normally on the other side of the camera, and now I'm the headlines. And you know, it felt as almost there was a conflict of interest there, because you know, I had a personal story to tell, but I was involved with making the news, not being the news. So that was a real strange time. And you know, I did pursue civil action successfully afterwards, but it was, none of this was about playing. You know, I just wanted to make sure that obviously something wasn't working in the system, and you know, I felt like I needed to do this. But there was a time when I had to say enough is enough, and I had to put it to bed, because it almost was stopping me from grieving, because I became so focused on the court case that I used that as an excuse not to deal with my own personal grieving.
I think that's wonderful what you just said, because I was thinking, like, as I asked earlier, like, did it help you with the healing? But I was thinking, did it help or hinder? And I think it actually probably did both, because I think you probably did get closure from it. Hopefully you're saving lives. That's an amazing positive change, because, you know, they had a system that didn't work. But it gets to a point, anything in life, it gets to a point where sometimes we're holding ourselves back, you know, whether that's going for the next job, whether it's moving on from grief. And it gets to that point, you think, this isn't really serving me, I do need to move on, which is courageous, isn't it? Because when you're so obsessed with something, or so habitual with something, you're like, who am I without this? But I think you've done brilliantly, because you've done the healing, the hindering, and then carried on healing, which is fabulous.
Yeah. I remember once I did an interview on the Jeremy Vine show on BBC Radio 2, and I was talking about the power of listening, and that, you know, in society we're very quick to judge people with mental health conditions, and just the power of being there for someone and just listening. And you don't have to have an agenda, you don't have to suggest anything, you can just listen. And you know, I've definitely, you know, learned so much from this. And I remember once, though, there was an article about my brother in the Daily Mail newspaper, and to be fair, I wasn't expecting. It was quite a, you know, a reasonable article, which, if I'm honest, I wasn't expecting from the Daily Mail. But I remember, little dig there, see what I did.
Made me chuckle.
But I remember the comments underneath on the online article, and this nurse in Scotland said something like, it's his own fault for wasting resources and drinking. And I remember I told my mum about it, and I was staring at that page for days, and I got so angry. I said to my mum, I'm gonna sign on and be a member of the Daily Mail online, and I'm gonna send her some comments back. And I just thought, do you know what? It's not worth it. She doesn't deserve any of my energy whatsoever. And this is someone that's supposed to be a nurse, that's supposed to be compassionate. But you know, I tried to blank that out, and you know, focus on positive people and have positive energy, but that was a tough one. But I think I did the right thing by ignoring it. Yeah.
I think that's, I don't know what the word is, John, if I'm honest. As an author, I probably should have a great word to say right now, but no. But my mum will remember this. She listens to the show, so hello, mum. But my mum will remember this. It was a newly qualified, as a newly qualified nurse many moons ago.
Yeah.
We had to do a project for the hospital.
Yeah.
And so mine was, I worked in acute medicine, and we had a lot of people that were alcoholics just coming back again and again and again.
Yeah.
And I become really aware of it, and they would come in and they'd know us all by name, we'd know them by name, and they, you know, we'd feed them, we'd sort of like put them on tablets to dry them out. But then we'd put them back into the community, and they'd be back in like a 12-week cycle.
Yep.
So when we had to do this project, I was like, well, people with like alcoholic needs or alcoholic addiction come back again, again, and again. It costs us loads, but really, what about if we looked at, why are they drinking? What is the trigger before that behavior? Like, what's their mental health? What happened in their childhood? What's happened?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I got severely told off. That doesn't happen in our hospital. That's not happening. It's like, I'm nursing their people. It does. These people need help beyond a tablet. And I got really
Wow.
feisty about it as much as I could because I was quieter then, John.
Yeah.
But they were totally dissed me. I didn't get any promotion, nothing, because they was just like, that doesn't happen. And my mum, bless her, she remembered on Anglia News 6 months, no more than 18 months later, it was everywhere in the news how much alcoholics cost the NHS. Not like that nurse was saying about a drain on resources, just the system again is not working.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? So when you said that, I mean, this is going back years. I haven't nursed since 2019, and I qualified in 2004.
Right.
And I was passionate then about helping these people. Like, why are they drinking? Why are we not doing the right thing? You know, Albert Einstein? If you keep doing the same thing again and again, expect something different, that's insane. You know.
Absolutely. And so much. That's such a good point that you say there, Shelley. And often the approach these days, you know, mental health provision in the UK is actually the worst in Europe. And you know, so often these days, you know, we think that medication and giving people drugs is the answer, and you know, we need, as you say, we need to see the bigger picture. We need to see why is this happening, and you know, we need to spend more time understanding people. And big drug companies and just giving people medication every day is not going to deal with the overall issue.
No, not at all. I think it's terrible that, I don't know, a nurse would say that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I get we're all different, but no.
You know, I guess you could say, well, you know, what do you expect? It's a Daily Mail reader. Sorry, another there, Shelley. But you know, I guess, you know, yeah. But it wasn't worthy of a response, and I think that was the best thing to do, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it's sent me off on a train of thought, John, because I'm thinking, like, well, how does she treat the patients when they come in? Does she treat them differently? Does she tell them that? Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, you know, we have a duty to care.
It's baffling, isn't it? But you know, I am assured that the majority of nurses in this UK are extremely compassionate. I've met so many and understanding. So yeah, you know, there's always a bad egg, isn't there? I guess.
Yeah. I returned to nursing. I have to think what child it was. We've got 4 children, but somewhere between the 3rd and 4th child, I returned to nursing. And then I kind of remembered why I left. And it's because you get those absolute amazing nurses. You know, they are the lifesavers. They're the ones that are holding your hand if you're not to be saved. You know, these absolute earth angels. I love that. But there were so many of those women. I can't think of a nice way to say it, which isn't uncommon, John, if I'm honest. But those kind of people that got those faces that say, I'm only here to pay the mortgage. You know, that kind of level of enjoyment in their job. They just got sort of that pinch face.
It's sad, isn't it? It's sad. And also, just while I think on as well, I just want to say that obviously I love the NHS, and you know, even with Yorkshire Ambulance Service, I was able to see the bigger picture. They were doing their best with the limited resources they had, and ultimately it was because of cutbacks from central government that the system was exposing. You know, you could see the flaws in the system essentially. So you know, no one set out to do anything wrong. You know, ultimately it's about funding from central government or lack of, essentially.
Yeah. No, the NHS is brilliant. I think it's just sad when we get these little pop-up moments where you think like, oh no, please don't say that. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So bless you. You haven't really cried much in your grief journey, you were saying, like you cried when you read out your dad's letter to Anthony, when you was like doing the ashes and things. So you've not really cried much, but you're here and you're talking today. So how did you create a positive change? How did you heal from your grief?
I think it was about I was on a mission almost to spread understanding of and raise awareness of mental health conditions, and I tried to turn it into a positive, and I ran the London Marathon for the first time 2 years ago, which I've never run professionally in my life, and that was incredible. I raised over £4,000 for the Mind Mental Health charity, and I mean that was an emotional day, and that was incredible. I did that for my brother. You know, and I use my media training to you know, raise awareness of these issues. You know, I spoke to Jeremy Vine about power of listening on Radio 2. And then I launched my Different Minds podcast series last year in the first lockdown, which essentially is about celebrating difference. Yeah.
And does that help you as well, like to almost heal when you're hearing other people's stories, what they've been through?
Yeah, I think as a society, yeah, I mean, I've been on my own personal journey because I probably had my own preconceived ideas of what someone is like with this neurological condition, or if they have this, or if they have bipolar disorder. And I've been on a massive healing and learning journey just by doing this podcast, and hope my listeners have as well. And yeah, I remember one time I was interviewing this guy who, from America, who has Asperger's syndrome, which is comes under the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis now. I remember when I first interviewed him, I had all these preconceived ideas in my head that this guy's probably going to be manipulative, and I need to be careful how I conduct this interview. I'm ashamed to say that was what was going through my head. And when I interviewed him, it was probably the most amazing, powerful interview I've ever done in my life. And he was such an amazing guy.
Oh,
And yeah, it was life changing for me. Yeah, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And I think I've learned to stop being so judgmental with myself and with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the world would be a better place. I think there's an element of human in there that I think where we've been treated in our experience today, we tend to have that judgment. Do you know what I mean? Like what our
Yeah.
parents might have said, and like, university and things like that. But I think as we, unfold our own story, we do tend to get less judgmental, because you think actually everyone's got a bit of a dark side, everyone's got their own story.
Yeah,
So be
absolutely.
kind always.
Yeah, be kind always. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, that fuels my fire and keeps me going essentially. Yeah.
Bless you. Speaking of keeping going, obviously everyone is affected by grief. I always say that grief is something, when we have a loss with something with which we have an emotional connection. So it doesn't mean someone dying, like if a relationship, ends, or your dreams or health, things like that. Whenever we lose something with which we're connected with, we get a grief response. So everyone's
Yeah.
affected by grief. So if you was to say to someone today, to our listeners, like what one positive change could they do today with their grief, where would you say they should start?
You're absolutely right, and as I say, grief comes in all different forms, doesn't it? From whether it's a relationship that's fallen apart, or you've lost someone, a dear friend or family member. And I think a good starting point is to allow yourself to feel sad, and to not shy away from those emotions. And obviously, grief is very personal; it's very individual. We all grieve differently, and that's absolutely fine. But it's okay to not feel okay, and you will have good days and you will have bad days, and that's actually okay. And I think it's about embracing those emotions, understanding those emotions. And I think it's about, yes, grief often will be associated with sad feelings, but it's important to keep memories alive of your lost ones, your loved ones. And they were part of your life, and that's never going to change. And that should be celebrated, and that's what they would have wanted essentially. And their memories will live on through you. And life is so short, so they would want you to make the best of it. And that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I hope all your listeners do as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's so true that we are all affected by grief, but then we're all as unique as our fingerprints when it comes to how we grieve.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because I remember once, me and my mum, for example, we grieve in very different ways. And my mum will just start crying randomly, and it's really weird because sometimes I feel like it's harsh to say this, but I sometimes get annoyed when my mum starts crying just for no reason. Obviously, it is for a reason, But I just feel so helpless because there's nothing I can do or say that's going to change. I can't change what's happened. But that's her way of, maybe I need to take a leaf out of her book, and maybe I shouldn't, again, I'm going back to I shouldn't judge, and that's how my mum does it. And with my mum, even now, it's difficult for her to, have any photographs of, Anthony in the house. Well, she has got one though. But I remember when she came around to my house once, and she told me off because I had a photograph in my new house of Anthony, and she got upset and she started crying, and then we had a little bit of an argument, and I'm like, well, Anthony was my brother. I'm not going to pretend he didn't exist just because you can't deal with seeing a picture of him. And then, it blew over, and yeah, it's just, and I guess that's normal in family dynamics. We all have different ways. We have our ups and our downs, and we all have different ways of coping with things. But for me, I'm not gonna, this is why I'm doing this podcast with you, Shelley. I am going to talk about my brother Anthony, and I'm not going to, shy away from that.
No, we never should, because all grief is valid. And if it's of any reassurance to you, John, there is a tendency that women and men grieve differently. So women tend to be what they call intuitive grievers, and men are instrumental grievers. So the intuitive one is women, and we're very much intuitive, like what's going on. So they go like, oh, I feel really sad today. Oh, well, and we're the talkers, we'll talk about it, sort of thing. Whereas men are instrumental, they can't fix the situation. So they start fixing things like bikes, DIY, working out, and they're very physical with their grief. So there is a difference anyway, the way we tend to grieve. So like, the women often go for talking therapies, whereas the men would go more for sort of like physical training therapy.
Yeah. And I think that's so fascinating, Shelley. And I also think, talking therapy is so powerful and so helpful. And, I had some therapy, as did my mum, and, talking about it is such a great thing to do. Yeah, I'm a great believer in talking therapy.
Yeah. And you said earlier, like, it's okay to not be okay, which is, used so much around grief. But as you were saying, it's about that creating a positive change because your life's still going on, not the way you would have maybe wished for it or expected it, but it goes on. So I'm gonna rebrand it and say it's okay to not be okay as long as you do something about it. And whether that is to cry, duvet day, talking therapies, yoga, whatever you want to do, just do something about not being okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And for me, I've found comfort in running marathons, and raising money for mental health charities at the same time, and forming new friendships, and getting out there, keeping fit, and I find that really therapeutic.
Bless you. I've absolutely loved this. You're going to help so many people because we say like grief affects everyone. Your unique journey just blows me away to have so much loss in such a short, space of time. And then the journey you went, the healing, the hindering. So John Offord, thank you so much for being here today.
No, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, Shelley, and I really enjoyed, going back there and talking this through with you in detail, and I feel honoured to be on your show.
Bless you. Keep doing what you're doing because I think you're absolutely rocking your own world and others.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you subscribe and leave a positive review. If you would like to create your own positive changes, you can buy Positive Changes, a self-kick book from all online book retailers or from shelleyf9.com. If you need a dollop of positivity until the next episode, come like and follow us over on Facebook at Shelley F Knight, Life Goes On. As always, I've been Shelley F Knight and you've been amazing.